Olive Tree, good evening. It is good to be with you guys at our next midweek stream. And we trust that tonight's conversation is going to be a good one. I have got 3 people with me today, not just 2, because I felt like the preach deserved it. Luto, thanks for being with us. Nats, thank you. And Rick, if you guys haven't seen Rick too often, you would have seen him on Sundays, not a midweek stream. I pulled him in here yesterday after I heard what he had to say. Rick is one of our worship leaders, and so stoked to have you with us as well, bud. So guys, on Sunday, Paul started with something fairly explosive. It's something that not too many people would have sat there and been indifferent. In fact, I've had a few conversations now, and no one that I have chatted to so far has been indifferent about the story he told, because while we aren't personally connected to it, we can identify with some part of that story. And so that might have caused like emotions to potentially flare or some sort of concerns and insecurities to come up. And I think there might have been a stroke of genius in that, and actually getting people engaged right up front for what he had to say. But what we had to say, we'll get into quite shortly. But Luta, I want to go to you first and just go like, was this a tough message to hear? Because I mean, of the way he started.
So there's almost 2 sides for it. Because personally speaking, I wasn't like sitting there getting upset at what he was saying. Like I was trying to follow him and understand what he's trying to say, but then the other half of me from the beginning, like just the pastoral side, is at the front of the seats, like biting my teeth or gritting my teeth, just going like, what's he going to say and how are people receiving it? So I was kind of more trying to put myself in the shoes of both sides, or all the sides that were represented there, and how they might be receiving it, what offense they might be hearing, or what objections they might have to.
Okay, sure. So guys, if you didn't see Sunday, I'd highly recommend that you go and watch it. It will really give you context for what we're talking about now. But Paul goes hard after offense, and talking about offense, and talking about sometimes how we take on a little bit of a victim mindset. But Rick, I want to go to you because I would love you to chat through what you spoke to me about yesterday, because yesterday I think you had quite a profound response to this, because you had your own personal response to it, and then you almost went on a journey. So can you explain that to us?
Okay, so basically as Paul was speaking, I took a side, I picked a side and I took offense, and as he recited more of the article, I found myself just stopping and going, wait, like, hold the phone. Who's entitled to the offense here? It feels like this gun is aimed at everyone in the room.
Yeah.
And he later moved on to speak about us not wasting the grace that is extended to us by God. And he was talking about God's generosity here. And then Paul says, well, Apostle Paul now, not Upper Highway Paul, says that we endure through affliction, through honor and dishonor, through slander and praise, and poor, yet making others rich. And then it just clicked. We live in a society where there's so much offense lying around waiting to get picked up, and we have a sense of entitlement to it. And then, like, as that happens, we create or we become a people that is like so imbued or drenched in victim mentality. It's kind of like a weirdly perfect game of dodgeball where all the balls being thrown around are being caught and being thrown perfectly, and it creates a never-ending cycle, And so Upper Highway Paul now, what he's doing, or what I felt he was doing, he was showing us a hectic picture of a victim mentality world in contrast to a generous one. And as deep as the offense of the first 10 minutes were and went, the gospel went deeper.
Yeah, that's good.
And my heart was open to it by the grace of God. It was open to the gospel as it was the offense. It's kind of like you don't see or believe or value how good is until you've seen the inverse, and I really liked the angle that it came at. It made me appreciate it more.
Good.
Cool.
I was so touched by what Rick shared, and I just want to add to that, that I think that's what the key is that we shouldn't be offended. I remember years ago we had a wonderful man preacher, Dudley, I've forgotten his, Thompson, Dudley House, sorry, and And he just had this moment of going, I'm dead in Christ, and a corpse can't be offended. That was quite something. But I think that there can be a step beyond that, and that's not a step for everybody, but it's to recognize that offense is not going to serve the situation, to not be offended. And as I was hearing it, I was also like Rick and I chatted this morning about it. I was like, I had to go put the kettle on, because that's what I do when I'm starting to feel a little bit of my amygdala going mental. Yeah. And but obviously I know Paul, and I love Paul, and I trust Paul, and I think that's a key thing, is sometimes we're trying to persuade people who we don't have a trust relationship, and I think you're wasting your time there, but that's on a side note. What I was trying to say is that I felt that kind of offense so easily coming on for the different people represented in that story, and there's a reason for that. It's that we're recognizing there's pain there. And so I would say that, for some of us, more than just tucking ourselves into the kingdom and not being offended, there can be a further step to be curious, to say, what's going on there? And to be slow to anger and quick to hear, and to go, why is this emitting this kind of response? What happened to that girl there? Yeah. Why was that guy so confident to reply like that without thinking it would hurt? And to be taking a step further, to not just go like, well, I'm fine, but is there something in this that could be more healing, more redeeming, that can help me to understand those around me better?
Yeah. So rather than just being a spectator to this, sometimes we're actually going, hey, I've got something here that I can give that can bring peace.
Yeah, and let me just understand better, because we many of us just observe those kind of stories and make our own assumptions without really understanding.
Yeah.
And so from a position of going, I won't be offended, but I'm going to be curious, just understand this brother or sister of mine who responded in this way, and why did they do that?
Yeah. So good, Nats. Guys, thank you so much for that. That's been gold already. I think that opening few minutes of Paul really set up for where he was going, because it's after that he really named offense. And just the fact that, through lockdown and all that, it's put pressure on the entire world. I mean, there's no people group, I think, that hasn't really felt this, unless you're in the deepest, darkest Amazon. Like, lockdown and this epidemic has put increased pressure, and that's brought like skeletons to the surface. That's brought insecurities to the surface. That's brought prejudices to the surface. And I love what Rick had to say, just going, there's offense everywhere that we just get to pick up, and I think it's become a habit. Even in believers, it's just become a habit. It's something we actually need the grace of God just to snap out of and go, I don't need to pick up offense all the time. So Paul went there, and then he named three things, and this is the one thing I want to highlight for everyone, maybe if you haven't watched the preach yet. He named three ways of taking offense, and the first one was to defend your honor. And that's obviously the going, my honor is now at stake. Whatever you've done has blemished my honor, and now I need to defend it. So the defending your honor very much is a retaliation type thing. You've done this to me, now I'm going to come back at you and make sure I come out on top. Then there was the defending your dignity, which is going, I'm not even going to show that this thing has had an effect on me. We're going to let it glide by. It might cost our relationship. It might cost the fact that we don't actually even connect anymore. But I'm coming out and I'm at least going to show. Might be dying inside, but on the outside, I'm okay and I'm cool. And then there's that final one, which you named the Neymar example, which is you get offended and you fall on the floor kicking and screaming and you cry foul. And part of that now is to make a very public name and shame of the other person or whoever offended you. And it's very much a labeling of that person, and it's very much a gathering of a whole bunch of people against that person. Now, obviously, there are certain things, there are certain injustices within humanity that require a public standing up and going, we will not stand for this anymore. But in our daily lives, the reality is that every one of those ways of defending or of dealing with offense, every one of those isn't the gospel. Every single one of them is not the gospel. There are moments or there's parts of it we can take. So with the defending of honor, yes, we do get to confront that thing that's offended us. I mean, Paul talks about speaking to your brother and sister when they've caused offense, but it is not a slaying of them. It's not a retaliation against them. With the dignity side, yes, it's everything. The gospel has a lot to say about keeping the peace, but it's not at the cost of this war that continues to go inside and at the cost of relationship. I mean, Paul, at the end of the preach, very clearly stated beautifully that this world is our family, God is our Father.
Yeah.
And that's really how we should be looking at it. And obviously, it's not the gospel, that final way of now, like, assassinating their character and causing a whole bunch of people to come against them. That's inciting war and violence and against each other, even if it's via words, instead of creating peace. And I think that the beautiful thing about this is that after that, Paul then goes to 2 Corinthians. And Rick, you've already mentioned some of the things that they said there, but I think the biggest thing for me is that as believers, we have to be going to God and understanding His grace first and the generosity of our Father's heart towards us in forgiving us, and where we've offended Him, for Him to constantly go, I'm bigger than that offense, and my love for you is bigger than that offense. And the gospel, what I have done for you, is bigger than that offense. He keeps on doing that for us. And so to understand that for us, I think, is going to be important. But I think the one thing for me that was absolutely standout, which I hadn't really thought about before, is that we restrict the flow of grace in our own lives. We restrict access to the grace when we restrict our affections. And Paul made that quite clear. Which means when we truly get grace, if we truly understand the gospel, then we should understand that, number one, the gospel is greater than any offense. And grace goes deeper. And deeper than any issue played out over social media as well. Let's be honest about that. The gospel and grace has to go deeper than that. But grace cannot be something we just receive. It can't be something that we get from God. Oh, God, thank you for grace. Thank you for your forgiveness. Thank you for your loving me. Grace has to be something that is given out to other people. It has to be something that we are called to live out. And so it's when we open up our affections for others that we open our access to the grace of God for ourselves. And that, for me, looks like generosity. And Paul spoke a ton about that, and we can't rehash everything in this conversation. But Nats, I loved your video clip on Sunday morning, that little story of your daughter, and you unpacked generosity and righteousness together. And so I would like to ask you, how do we become more generous?
Yeah, I think I would just like to highlight again that it's not that we become righteous because we're generous, but the other way around. We become more generous because of righteousness. It's generosity is the expression of righteousness. And so it's that growing relationship of realizing the benefit of being in Christ, of being in God, and how right it is there and how good it is there, that we just grow in ways of pouring out. It's similar to what you were just saying. It's like we give grace because we were given it. We love because we are loved. We forgive, forgiven people forgive. And so really generosity then is just an overflow of the incredible goodness we get tucked into Christ, into His righteousness. And I think that I would also just add to that it's a growing thing. I don't expect generosity of my 3-year-old with his box of Smarties like I do of my 21-year-old.
Yeah, that's good.
And God is as kind with our growth in generosity. And as we believe more and more and more how good He is and how amazing it is to be within Him, that our generosity grows and becomes more smart and more mature, and it should never be guilt-driven. But if it is, you'll deal with it over time. But that it becomes just such a peacemaking expression and a loving expression of who He is in your life.
That's awesome. I mean, I think so often when we think of generosity, our go-to point is that of material generosity, isn't it? And that's a beautiful display. It's beautiful evidence of believers when they're going, I will give. I might be in lack myself, but I will give of what I do have so that others may have, so that others may be blessed, so that others can also understand the goodness of God. And that's great, but so much more generosity goes to a generosity of spirit, a generosity of heart, which is not necessarily giving materially, but it is giving of yourself. And so when it comes to offense, and this is where I want to come and land it, is Lutz, I want to go to you first, and I'd like to ask Rick the same question, is what does generosity look like in the face of offense? So when you are being attacked, when you have been hurt, what does generosity of heart look like in that space?
Cool. First of all, I want to just say that everything that's been said so far is so profound and so true. And I would be echoing what everyone is saying, but what I think, or if I had to put in one word, it would be empathy. I personally, now more than ever, I try to put myself in the shoes of the person that's offending me or attacking me, or and this is not like, this is anecdotal, but I try to ask myself, how could they possibly be, or why could they possibly believe that what they're doing is right, or how could they possibly believe what they believe? And I make a genuine attempt to understand that. I know it's not fair, but like Paul said, if you're looking for fair all the time, you win the argument and you lose the relationship.
Yeah, it's true.
And so, it's to try understand. And I have come to that place a lot of times. Like, I mean, like I think of guys that were, I don't know if I'm allowed to mention this, but storming the Capitol and all the rest of that stuff.
Yeah.
And it's given me a lot of, what can I say, to step back and empathize with them has given me a lot of perspective, I say.
Okay.
And then that allows me to have even more grace in dealing with it, because now I go, how would I want to be dealt with when it's me who asks that, or when it's me who's frustrated, when it's me who's the perpetrator, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then I think it does what Paul was saying with the sowing sparingly and reaping sparingly. It just enables grace to flow.
So good. Love that. Thanks, Leeds. Rick, what does generosity look like in offense?
So for me, it's like as soon as I feel the offense creeping in, like it was probably the first 2 seconds on Sunday, but as soon as I feel it creeping in, I step outside of how I feel. That may take a day, it may take, but I step outside of how I feel, and I choose to look at a more honoring way to deal with the situation, or a more sober way of dealing with the situation. So that means a less instinctive one and a more grace-led one,
Okay, good.
where I go, how can we have this conversation, even if we even need to, and where are we having it, and all of those things. So I look at those things. It's kind of like in Proverbs 25, where it says that feed your enemy and quench their thirst and all of that, except this time it's less for the pleasure of watching their heads burn with coal, but it's more for the reward of seeing their hearts open to your generosity,
so good, bro.
and having an impact potentially.
Yeah. So good. I love both of your answers. I almost don't want to add to that at all. The only thing I can think of outside of that right now is that he who has been forgiven much loves much.
Yeah.
And so generosity looks like, you don't deserve my forgiveness, but I'm going to give it anyway. And sometimes I'm going to give that forgiveness even before we've landed this conversation. Sometimes I'm going to give this forgiveness even before we have made good with each other. And I think some people don't realize that is possible. That no, you need to know how much I've hurt, and I need to have an apology from you before I give you forgiveness. But really, it's not that way around. Jesus calls people to come to Him, but the act of dying on the cross for our sins has happened already. We just get to go and receive that forgiveness when we come to Him.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, the biggest thing is that offense can be dropped at the foot of the cross, and we can take on generosity and forgive others because it's been done for us. Guys, thank you so much for your input tonight. This has been so good for us. Guys at home, I hope you've enjoyed this. If you're going into life group setting, or even if you're at home by yourself, I've got a couple questions for you. It's a bit more of an exercise. This is not just simple questions, but this is something I'd love you guys to answer and write down and then share with each other. So I've got 3 questions for you, and I've just got to unmix my notes, and then we'll get there. But here's the first exercise. The first exercise for you is to get a piece of pen and paper, or get your cell phone if you're not using it for Zoom, and write down the areas that you take offense in. Now, that could be specific bugbears or pet peeves or something like that. You can even go to social media right now and just take a look at social media, and you can ask yourself, what do you see in the news feed? What posts do you see that make you mad, that instantly spark that anger? And it might be worth writing down notes to say, why does that make you angry? So let's put that down. There's no one that I know of that hasn't taken offense at someone or something in lockdown. And so won't you write those things down? And if you're brave enough, just share them with the group. I think what you're going to find is that you're not the only one taking offense at that specific thing. There's a whole bunch of other people. We're all on the same boat here. The second thing I'd like you to do once you've done that and shared that is to then ask this question: what does the gospel say about that person or that people group that I've taken offense at? So what is the gospel's answer to that issue? Okay, and what we're looking for here is the heart of God towards these people, and we know God has an answer for each one of these things. So take a moment to write those down for whatever you've written in terms of the offenses, and then share that. And then the final question for you that we have is, what should be my personal response to that person or group? And so if I take on a generous heart towards that person or towards that people group or towards that issue, how should I personally be responding to that? What should my heart's attitude be? If you want to write that down and share that with your group. And then I think we just get to pray for each other and just go, there's a generosity from our Father that I think if we get, actually changes us from the inside out. And for us as life groups to actually pray, going, Father, can we get a greater glimpse of your generosity? And can you help us be more generous? Give us the courage to be more generous and more vulnerable with others. That'll be good. Guys, I hope this is a good evening for you. Enjoy the conversation, and we'll catch up soon. Thank you, guys.